The receptionist snapped my membership card off the counter like it might contaminate her fingers. The manager's thin smile hovering above a tablet that branded me non-compliant, while a young guard eased between me and the polished turnstiles. And behind them, the trophy case burned with cold light as linen-clad members drifted through a gate that never questioned their names. I stood there with my blue folder and the careful shine on my shoes, feeling the air conditioner lay a frosted hand across my neck, hearing the printer rattle like teeth as the manager's voice, soft, precise, superior, told me to wait without reason. His eyes sliding past me the way rain slides off glass. And in that bright lobby, I tasted the metal of humiliation as clearly as the lemon on the floor. Watched children's sneakers squeak past while my card vanished into a drawer, and promised myself that before this room swallowed me whole, I would make the cameras, the clock, and their own rules speak out loud. Because today, their label would meet my evidence, and the balance would tilt. One request before the next scene. Subscribe, comment where you're watching, and share this story. Light spreads when we pass it on. The moment my card touched the counter, the receptionist pulled it back like it might set off an alarm and said I needed to step aside. Her voice was soft enough not to carry, but it had the weight of a stamp. The marble under my shoes felt colder than it should on a sunny afternoon. A faint citrus cleaner floated up from the floor, and somewhere a printer rattled like teeth. I stood with my blue folder tucked under my arm and watched my card slide out of sight beneath the lip of the desk. A security guard shifted closer. He looked new, jaw tight, hand hovering near his radio like a habit he hadn't tested yet. He didn't say anything at first, just arranged himself between me and the line. The thermostat must have been set for meat. The air conditioning poured down from a vent above us and made the glass trophy cases along the wall fog for a breath, then clear again. Kids in fresh sneakers skidded past. Their laces squeaked. Their parents didn't look over. I asked for the reason. The receptionist glanced at the screen, back to me, then to the line. She said my account had a note. She didn't specify. She told me to wait by the stanchions. Her badge caught the light when she bent to retrieve a form. The badge read a first name and the word front desk. I read it twice, quietly, just to remember it. Behind her, a light on the monitor pulsed. It cast a red tint across the edge of the counter that matched nothing else in the room. The guard guided me 2 steps to the side with an open palm, not touching me, and stood in front of the rope. He kept his eyes on a spot over my shoulder. Beyond him, in the glass, I saw myself, the same old jacket, the careful shine on my shoes, the blue folder that has learned my grip. My life used to laugh that I'd organize my patients by tab color. I placed the folder on a narrow side table, the kind set out for flyers, and undid the elastic. Inside, the papers breathed like a small book waking. On top, the club statute had yellow flags stuck to paragraphs on transparency and review. Beneath that, the year's dues receipt, then the email thread that confirmed my renewal, then my letter from the neighborhood association about community hours. Each one lived in a clear sleeve. I laid them in a row, close enough to touch with one hand. The edges made a neat little city. The manager appeared from a side door holding a tablet pressed to his ribs. He looked at me, then at the guard. His posture had that polite iron you hear in corporate voicemails. He turned the tablet so the receptionist could see and pointed to a block of text. The word non-compliant sat there like it had been waiting for a body to attach itself to. No explanation, just the word and a yellow triangle beside my name. I asked for the number of the internal occurrence. I said it in the same tone I use when ordering coffee, because tone becomes the whole story in places like this. The receptionist blinked at the manager. He said there would be a review and that I should wait in the lobby. I repeated my request for the incident number. I said I'd like the policy that covered retention of a member's card pending review. The security guard cleared his throat. The manager said someone would bring the paperwork when the system generated it. The system apparently takes its time. I wrote their names from the badges on a yellow sticky note I keep in the folder's back sleeve. First name, role, time. I wrote the time from the big analog clock above the staircase, and beside it the smell in the air, because I've noticed the mind trusts memories that have a scent attached. I stood where the ceiling camera could see me and lifted my chin just enough to catch its glass eye. The marble echoed the soft chatter of people crossing the lobby. One woman's perfume left a lane as she passed. Another man laughed into his phone, and the sound broke against the trophy case and slid down. The manager asked the guard to escort me to a seating area. It wasn't far, just past the rope, near a column with a flamed list of members' responsibilities. The chairs were metal with a thin cushion that sighed when I sat. A vent whispered above my head, and the pendant lights flickered almost imperceptibly in the second before settling. I set the blue folder on my knees and opened the email app on my phone. I typed to my granddaughter, "Need you to pull up the renewal email and the dues receipt and hold them handy. Also look for anything with the subject photo update." I sent it and felt the faint haptic click return to my palm. Across the lobby, I saw the doorway that leads to the administrative corridor. Above it, a discreet camera pointed toward the counter, catching broad sweeps of the entrance. I made a mental triangle. That camera, the one above the lobby seating, and the lens over the reception desk. I didn't need a perfect picture, just enough to ask the right questions about angles and timestamps later. When I lifted my gaze, the manager's tablet reflected me again, a blur in the glass. He turned and walked into a small glass room beside the desk. He carried my card. He didn't invite me in. On the side table, a stack of club newsletters leaned against a pamphlet about community events. I picked one up and tapped the sentence that said the club values transparency above all. I didn't circle it. I didn't make a show. I just held my finger there a second, the way you do when you're trying to teach yourself not to forget. The stanchion rope sagged a little in the middle, its chrome post mirroring the ceiling's white. The lobby's hum settled into a slow tide that pressed and released against me. The security guard shifted his stance again. His radio clicked once, twice. He looked at my folder with a curiosity that had nothing to do with me personally, and everything to do with the way papers make a shape. He asked me if I needed water. I told him no, thank you. He nodded as if I'd earned a point for good behavior. It wasn't malice. It was a script he'd been taught by someone who never expected to sit in my chair. I aligned the statute page with the edge of the folder and ran my finger down the relevant paragraph. I could recite most of it by now, but I read it anyway, lips moving just enough to keep the words breathing. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. The cold from the marble climbed my shoes and held on around my ankles. It kept me awake. A string of children trailed a coach with a clipboard, all wearing shirts with the club logo. They glanced at me in a way in the same motion, effortlessly polite. I asked again for the incident number. The receptionist said she needed to check with her supervisor. I said I would also like the section of policy that defines non-compliant. She said the manager would be right with me. The clock above the stairs clicked a minute forward. My phone buzzed. A short reply from my granddaughter saying she'd found the emails and receipts. I didn't open it. I just felt the tile under my feet and the chair's thin cushion accept my weight. The manager's glass room had a small indicator light above the door, the kind you see in conference spaces to show booked status. It wasn't on when he entered.
Now it glowed red. He placed my card on the glass table inside and tapped on his tablet. The receptionist leaned toward her screen. The word flagged slid into view again, brighter, like the system had decided to raise its voice. I looked at the trophy case. The plaques reflected the overhead fixtures as long spines of light. I remembered polishing my own shoes in the morning, how the leather drank the cloth's small circles, how my hand stayed steady. I shifted the blue folder so that the yellow flags were visible even from the receptionist angle, not as a challenge, just as a reminder that paper has a way of naming things that screens sometimes blur. The printer started up again somewhere behind the desk. A page thunked onto a tray. The receptionist didn't move to retrieve it. The guard cleared his throat. The clock advanced one more shade. People came in pairs and emerged from the turnstiles without having to tell anyone who they were. The smell of disinfectant was joined by something sweet from the cafe. Maybe vanilla, maybe cinnamon. It softened the room by a degree. I asked a third time for the incident number and added that I would like a time-stamped receipt showing that my card had been retained for review. The receptionist met my eyes for the first time. She said she would print something. She tapped keys. She stopped. She looked toward the glass room. The manager remained inside, back turned to us, my card on the table by his left hand. He lifted a small key on a ring from a drawer, set it down, and picked it up again. Then he slid my card toward a shallow tray and opened the drawer. I breathed in, long and steady, felt the paper edges under my fingertips, the metal chair cool through my jacket, the building's chill holding the lobby like a hand, and I watched the manager lower my membership card into the drawer as a red light above the glass room locked on and stayed steady. The guard gave a polite motion with his chin. "Administrative corridor, sir." Not a command, but it only had one answer. I gathered the blue folder and the chair sighed when I stood. The corridor swallowed the lobby's brightness and replaced it with the tin taste of air conditioning and copier dust, walls the color of paper, a carpet that quieted even the loudest foot. On the left, a framed list of procedures kept the same smile no matter how you read it. On the right, a small camera lived in the corner near the ceiling, its glass bead catching a square of light. A row of metal chairs waited, narrow as bleachers. I chose the second one, set the folder across my knees, and flattened my palm over it until the chill from the vent overtook the paper warmth. I told myself, the way I'd done in bank lines and at ticket windows and in lobbies that liked their rules more than their people, start with the page. I pulled a lined sheet from the back sleeve and wrote "Request for Review" at the top, slow enough that each letter landed heavy. Under it, I copied the paragraph headings from the statute: transparency, right of explanation, access to records, then the time from the wall clock above the exit sign, then the names from the badges, first name, title, the way they held themselves when they said no. I added what I could see with the camera in mind: the corridor's angle, my seat position, the doors in frame. Oppression rarely says its name out loud. It prefers to drift in on air vents and live in small gestures, the ones that leave no bruise but move your body anyway. I noted that the request would include the video of my card being retained, the lobby footage from the first moment I stepped to the desk, the policy sections used to justify the red light, and a receipt for the retention itself, with a timestamp, because if something has weight, it should leave a mark. My phone buzzed once, then again. Ava. Her messages came like steady breath. She found a renewal confirmation, the dues receipt, the welcome email with the updated photo link, the line in the portal that said account active. She sent screenshots with dates circled and file names unedited so our trail would match theirs. She added a quiet note about the gate logs showing my entries over the last months, with times that looked like early afternoons and Saturday mornings, the slow hours when I like to move. Without hearing her voice, I could hear her voice. Calm, organized, the tone she learned from making sense of school portals that turned simple grades into puzzles. I laid the printed receipt from my folder beside the phone and matched the numbers with my finger. The corridor smelled faintly of toner and the lemon cleaner they use on everything that has a handle. Somewhere, a door closed with the hush of brushed metal. The receptionist's extension number sat in tiny type on the corner of a newsletter trapped under a puck of a critic. I wrote it down. I rotated the folder 90 degrees so the statue's yellow flags faced the hallway and kept my own voice even in my head. Procedure is a river, I told myself. You don't stop it by yelling at the water. You follow it to a place where the banks are lower. A woman in a navy blazer appeared at the far end of the corridor and walked past me without looking at me, as if my chair were a sign she had seen before and trusted to be ignored. The guard from the lobby took up a position near the corner, far enough not to hear words, but close enough to interpret gestures. The temperature seemed to drop another degree. I rubbed my thumb along the folder's edge where the plastic sleeve meets paper and felt the seam catch and release.
I finished the first page of the request and started a second. I wrote the phrase, internal occurrence number, 3 different ways to make sure there would be no misunderstanding. Reference number, incident number, ticket number. I added a line requesting the name of the policy that allowed retention of a member card prior to documented explanation. I asked for the supervisor on duty to sign the receipt, acknowledging retention at the time posted on the lobby clock. As I wrote, a copier in a back room coughed a sheet into the tray, and the smell of warm paper drifted out to meet me. It was almost comforting, that smell. The promise of something becoming official. Ava sent one more message, a short video of her screen scrolling through my payment date, the green check mark that lives next to the words membership active, and the email thread with the updated photo link clearly marked completed. She ended with a simple line about being 5 minutes away if I needed her. The thought of her walking through the lobby as easily as the woman in linen made my chest tight for a heartbeat. I told her to hold where she was, that I'd need her eyes more than her feet, and that she should keep the screen recordings in case the club's portal decided to tidy itself later. Footsteps paused at the corridor's end. A man with a neat part in his hair and a lanyard heavy with keys stood there holding a thin stack of paper that didn't want to be seen. He had the look of someone who thinks before he speaks, not because he's careful, but because the words travel first to an office in his head where a smaller office waits. Supervisor, his badge said. He nodded at the guard, then at me, and asked me to follow him to a meeting room. Not an invitation, a movement in a flowchart. The room kept the glass walls from the lobby, but traded trophies for a white table that showed fingerprints if you breathed on it. A screen hung on the far wall, black glass with a faint reflection of our 3 bodies in it. 2 chairs faced the table, one with a notebook open to a blank page. The supervisor set the stack down and slid a gray folder across the surface until it met my hands. The folder had the club's emblem stamped into it. No color, just pressure. He sat, made a small tent with his fingers, and said there had been a flag. He said the system sometimes did that after updates. He said it would be reviewed. I placed my request for review on the table and let the pages show their headings: transparency, explanation, access to records. I placed the statute beside it, my yellow flags like small windows. I kept my breathing even enough to hear the hum in the ceiling and the soft, high-pitched note that always lives inside screens before they wake. The supervisor opened his folder and revealed a document titled Non-Compliance Index, Risk Flags. He tilted it so I could see my name next to a yellow triangle, the notes field empty, the justification line blank as untouched snow.
I asked for the internal occurrence number, and he pointed to a corner of his page where a longer number lived, a string that looked like an apology. I copied it into my second sheet. I asked for the policy that mapped a flag to the phrase non-compliant, and he said the policy lived inside the audit guidelines. He tapped the folder's back pocket and slid out a stapled packet with a table of contents that promised clarity and delivered small print. He did not hand it to me yet. He adjusted the angle of his chair, and the keys on his lanyard clicked. On the screen, the club's interface bloomed. A login shield, a spinning circle, then a grid of camera views that made the lobby look like a stage from the ceiling's point of view. He selected the feed that faced the front desk. The timeline bar at the bottom glowed in segments of blue, each one a minute breathing. He rewound to the top of the hour, then let the cursor crawl forward until my outline moved into the frame. My jacket, my shoes, my blue folder, like a small island in my arms. I could see the receptionist's hands, the flicker of red, the guard's step that wasn't a step, and still changed the line of my day.
I didn't lean forward. I sat back enough to feel the chair's edge press the line of my shoulder blades. Ava's latest message blinked on my phone. She had located the portion of the statute that mirrored the club's own language in its brochure, but I left the phone face down on the table. The supervisor rested his hand on the mouse. On his forearm, the veins rose like a map. The cursor slipped to the play button and held there, a small white triangle wearing a whole moment like a mask, and the room waited to see whether the system would breathe for me or against me. He didn't press play. He lifted his finger and let the pointer drift like a leaf over still water, then clicked the settings icon and asked me to confirm the exact minute I had set my card on the counter, as if the clock above the stairs and the clock in the lobby camera and the clock on the receptionist's terminal might live in 3 different countries. The air in the glass room had the faint metallic taste of electronics warming. The screen threw a cool glow on the table that made my hands look like someone else's. The word non-compliant lived in the corner of his printout like a stubborn stain. I said the time from the wall clock and from my notes. He nodded, then asked me to wait while he fetched the audit guidelines. He used that tone officers keep for people they don't expect to know the difference between a receipt and a record. My chest tightened and loosened in the same breath. A tide I've learned not to fight. I put my palm on the blue folder and felt the slight give of the plastic sleeve, the soft rasp where a tab has been pulled often enough to remember. I thought of my wife's voice in places like this. Slow your breathing. Find the policy. Ask for the number that proves the moment exists. Loss had trained me to make room for smaller losses. 5 minutes here, a title misused there, until the day the little ones lined up and start pretending to be law. The screen hummed a high, patient note. The supervisor's keys clicked as he left the room, and the door sighed shut behind him, leaving me with my reflection and the table's cold edge under my forearms. I opened the folder and rebuilt the path as if I were laying planks across a narrow creek. Dues receipt, first plank. Renewal email, second plank. Club portal showing active status, third. Gate logs, fourth. Bylaws excerpt flagged for transparency and review, fifth. I placed the neighborhood association letter on top, its letterhead stiff and faintly textured, the ink pressed deeper in the parts that matter. I wrote a checklist header on a fresh sheet. Camera footage time range, chain of custody, incident number, policy basis for retention, receipt with timestamp, supervisor signature, and left a space for the name of a board member. If the river of procedure was going to carry me, I would choose where to step in. My phone buzzed and slid a half-inch across the smooth table. Ava's message was a line of breath after a run. The portal shows my status active. The green check is beside my name, and the photo update flag was marked completed last month. She included a screen recording of the portal, the cursor pausing long enough on each line for anyone to read. I could hear the quiet room at her end and the way the microphone picked up a clock somewhere else in the house.
I wrote completed next to photo update and underlined it. The supervisor returned with a gray folder and did not set it within my reach. He placed it on his side of the table, hand resting on the top edge as if the paper might float away. He asked again about the time I presented my card. He clicked forward 3 minutes in the timeline, then back 1, then forward half a minute, searching for something that looked like certainty in a strip of blue. The cursor hovered over the play triangle a second time. He cleared his throat and said we might need a second person to witness the review. His ring caught the light when he reached for the phone.
I asked that the witness be a board member and that meeting minutes be recorded. I kept my voice even, the way you keep a lantern steady when crossing a dark yard. I said I'd be requesting a copy of the minutes and of the policies cited in any determination. He nodded without nodding, that small inward motion people make when their body is ahead of their mouth. He dialed a number and asked for a director. The air conditioning rattled the vent for a beat and then settled into a steady whisper. While we waited, I wrote the board request into my checklist and noted the time again. The smell of toner drifted in from the corridor, the hot paper scent you can almost see. Oppression does not always arrive as a hand. Sometimes it is a series of closed drawers and delayed buttons, a vocabulary used like a wall instead of a window. The word non-compliant did not grow smaller by being printed, it grew heavier. I pressed my fingertips into the table's edge until I felt the pulse ease. Avis sent another message. The gate log shows my fob denied at the entrance at the same minute the receptionist scanned my card, and she had matched it to entries from previous weeks that showed normal access. She added a line from the club's brochure, a little rectangle of text about value and transparency and providing clear avenues for review, and a photo she took earlier of the poster in the lobby listing member rights. Her steadiness reached me through the glass as much as her research. I told her I might need her to preserve the screen recordings with time and date visible. A knock at the door. A man in a dark suit with a folder the color of midnight stepped in, eyes already scanning the table. Director, the badge said, with no other name. He smelled like rain caught in wool, a clean, cool odor that made the electronics breath seem louder. He sat opposite me, opened his folder halfway and paused. He asked the supervisor whether we had an incident number. The supervisor recited the long string from the printout. I wrote it into the margin and circled it twice. The director asked what policy term had triggered the label on my account. The supervisor glanced at the gray folder and said the audit guidelines referenced a verification pending flag associated with profile updates. He used the phrase as if it explained more than it did. I asked for the specific section and revision date. The director lifted a corner of the midnight folder. Paper whispered like a tide under a dock. He said he would produce the section. He did not produce it yet. I kept my eye on the screen. The image of me at the counter waited, my blue folder a patch of color in a room that preferred neutral. The play button remained untouched. I could feel the chair's metal through my jacket and the outline of the table in the bones of my forearms. I wrote one more line on my checklist. Request copy of lobby footage from time of presentation through retention of card. Include chain of custody details and list of authorized viewers. The supervisor reached for the mouse again, but the phone vibrated on the table. He took the call and turned away, just enough to make his words into a rhythm instead of meaning. The director aligned his folder with the table's edge. I let the silence name the next step. My thumb traced the corner of the neighborhood association letter, the embossed seal raised under the paper like a heartbeat. My wife would have told me to bring that, proof of belonging that does not depend on a screen being willing to show it.
I sent a brief message to the local consumer desk, the one that covers services and policies, not people. I wrote that I was at the club, that a member card had been retained under the term non-compliant without an articulated policy basis, and that I was requesting a policy review and a copy of the minutes. I wrote that no names would be shared, only procedures and documents. I asked whether a reporter could observe the process from outside the room to verify that the policy, not any person, was the story. The message left my phone and took the room's thin hum with it for a second. Ava replied with a screenshot of the bylaws section that mirrored the brochure's language on transparency and review. She had highlighted a sentence about providing members with a written explanation without unreasonable delay. Her text under it was 3 words: "This is ours." I swallowed the tightness in my throat and put that page on top of the stack. The table's white surface made the yellow flags glow like small, brave lamps. The supervisor hung up and nodded to the director. He adjusted the audio slider on the screen, even though we were still watching silence. The cursor drifted over the timeline again and found my entrance a second time, like a memory testing itself. Footsteps sounded in the corridor outside, a light, quick stride, and the soft jingle of something clipped to a lanyard. The director opened the midnight folder an inch more, and inside I saw the title page of a stapled packet with a line of text in a font meant for seriousness. I asked that the review be recorded in the club's log with the incident number, and that any policy cited be attached as an exhibit to the minutes. The director said that was reasonable. He lifted the packet and set it down again without turning the first page. A rhythm built in my chest that matched the faint vibration of my phone on the table. The lights in the ceiling hummed. The room smelled like warm plastic and rain and fabric. A tap on the glass made us all turn our heads by the same small degree. A figure stood just outside, press badge raised to the window, while the director cracked the midnight folder fully open to the cover page stamped Audit Guidelines. If this moment speaks to you, like it, comment your view and share. Each click invites another witness. The press badge hovered in the glass like a small moon. The director lifted his eyes, then lowered them to the audit guidelines and traced the table of contents with one finger, stopping where the sections turned from warm language to cold rules. The supervisor set his phone down face up, screen dark, as if silence itself were an attendee that needed a seat. I could feel the room's temperature try for neutral and miss by a degree. The screen kept my outline at the desk, frozen in the act of being ordinary. We began with the minutes. The director asked for names and roles, and I said them, spelling each the way the badges had taught me. He repeated the incident number and wrote it at the top of a yellow pad, harder than necessary, as if weight alone could keep numbers honest. The supervisor loosened the gray folder's clip and slid out a page stamped Revision Log. The paper had the smooth drag of a new print. He placed it between us like a shared map. I recorded the time and the order of things. Guidelines on the table, camera view cued, director present, press waiting outside the glass by request.
The director paged to a section labeled Verification Workflows. The words stacked themselves with that dry precision bureaucracies love. Pending verification, manual review queue, discretionary hold. In a small box, a phrase linked flags to labels. The box said hold for verification, not non-compliant. I watched his eyes pause on that box. He did not speak. The supervisor's pen stopped moving. Outside, the press badge lowered an inch and rose again, a tide at the window. I asked for the section number and the revision date. The director named them, and the numbers landed on my page with the sound I've learned to hear without hearing. Ava's message arrived with a double buzz, quiet and urgent at once. She had found the last portal notice from the month my photo update completed and tucked it behind the receipt in a folder called Audit. She added a short note about the brochure language matching the bylaw clause I had flagged. I told her to keep recording the screen as she moved. No edits, just scroll and stop. We ran the footage. No audio, just the low whir of ventilation and the mouse's tiny clicks. The image moved forward in clean little steps. My approach, the handoff of the card, the red glow washing the counter's edge, the guard's half step, my blue folder on the table by the flyers, my mouth shaping the request for an occurrence number. The supervisor moved the time slider back a few seconds and then forward again to catch the moment when the receptionist set my card to one side. You could see her lean into the screen as the label populated. The word appeared with a bureaucratic neatness that made it worse. The director asked for the chain of custody field. The supervisor opened a side panel and read the viewer list. I copied each role and time onto my sheet and left a space for the signature that would show I had asked today. We let the video continue until the manager opened his glass door and carried my card into the room, the light above the door shifting from off to red as the latch settled. The cursor stopped at the frame where the drawer pulled open just enough to take my name into it. The director drew a small square with his thumbnail on the table, not marking anything, only thinking. He set the audit guidelines beside the footage and paged to terminology. The words did what words often do when they're asked to stand for too many things. They blurred at the edges if you didn't hold them down. He ran a finger under the definitions, and the supervisor read them aloud in a slower voice than he used for everything else, as if slowing would make the ink behave. Non-compliant never belonged to pending verification. The categories had wandered and taken people with them. Outside the glass, the press badge's lanyard glinted. I requested for the minutes that the terminology variants be recorded and attached to the incident. The director nodded, then wrote a short line that seemed to straighten his shoulders. The supervisor shifted, clicked a checkbox labeled Attach Exhibit, and a small icon appeared on the screen beside the incident number. The room changed temperature by half a thought. The guideline staples caught the light and threw back something softer. The receptionist knocked and came in with a thin printout and a pen. Her eyes stayed on the paper. She placed the sheet near my hand, and the ink line for signature waited there like a held breath. It was a retention receipt, time-stamped, incident number, supervisor field, reason for hold listed as pending verification. I set my palm on the table and let my fingers feel the paper's slight tooth. I asked that the reason reflect the language in the guidelines, not the mislabel in the profile. The director said yes. The supervisor made the change on his screen and reprinted. The printer's sound reached us a heartbeat later, friendly and decisive.
The guard appeared in the doorway at the director's gesture. He looked younger in here, less sure where to put his hands. The director asked him to confirm when he moved me from the counter to the seating area and whether he provided a protocol number. The guard said the time. I matched it against the wall clock I had written down. He said he had not provided a number because none had been given to him. The director wrote that sentence into the minutes and underlined it once. I let the air out of my lungs the way you let a boat drift to the center of the current and stop fighting the oars. The veteran member I had noted in the lobby stepped in at the director's request. He signed in the witness column and said he saw me ask for the number.
He added that he had heard the word non-compliant from a few feet away without explanation. He didn't color it. He didn't add heat. He just placed the words where they had occurred. I thanked him, and he nodded in that small way older men recognize each other's weather. The director logged his name and time. Ava sent a final packet, a clean set of screenshots labeled with the portal time in the corner, the green check beside my status, the words "photo update completed," the circled date. She added one line of the bylaw text with a digital highlight. Members have the right to a written explanation without unreasonable delay, and a thumb pointing to it because she knows how quickly small truths get lost in larger rooms. I placed her pages atop the pile so the yellow flags and her highlight spoke the same language. The director looked from the guidelines to the footage to the receipt. He clicked his pen once, then didn't click it again. He asked the supervisor to open a new item, corrective measures considered. The supervisor typed as he spoke, revised label mapping to align with audit language, trained front desk to issue protocol number at first indication of hold, post clear steps for review at reception, include status field on initial profile screen to reduce assumptions, ensure a summary of rights is visible at the lobby. He read back the list. I watched the words land and sit. The room seemed to accept gravity. I asked that my request for minutes and exhibits be acknowledged in writing before the meeting concluded. The director agreed and wrote a short receipt on the yellow pad, then tore it off and handed it to me. The paper was warm from his hand. It said what was necessary, that I had requested the documents, that the incident number would anchor them, that attachments would include the terminology section and the footage reference. He put a second line beneath, promising that a board review would be scheduled as soon as possible this afternoon to read the corrections into the record. We paused, all three of us looking at the screen without seeing it, as if the glass itself were catching up. The press badge outside the door waited. The supervisor closed the gray folder halfway and straightened the stack. The director placed the audit guidelines on top of my blue one for a moment, their edges aligned, then slid them back. He asked if there was anything I wanted added before we moved to drafting the notice that would be read later. I asked that the lobby signage include the words incident number in the first line. He wrote the phrase and underlined it. We left the glass room together, and the corridor's cooler air washed over us. I felt the building's rhythm change by a beat, the way a long hallway does after someone has turned on a light at the far end. The receptionist looked up when we passed. She had a new printout waiting, the corrected receipt with the proper reason listed, and the time exactly as the lobby clock holds it. The guard stepped aside and let a couple pass, then returned to his post with his shoulders set in a different shape.
Back in the lobby, the trophies caught the pendant light in softer angles. The disinfectant scent had thinned, and something from the cafe drifted out again, warmer now. I set the blue folder on the side table by the flyers and retied the elastic gently, as if closing a book after finishing a careful chapter. My name lived where it should, on paper and in the minutes, with numbers that pointed to something more than a hunch in the system. The air moved across the marble and up into the higher ceiling, and for the first time since I arrived, it felt like the room had room for me. They gathered us in the lobby because the glass room was too small for what needed saying. The director stood near the trophy case with a printed notice in the yellow pad where he had written the incident number hard enough to leave an imprint. The receptionist had a clipboard and a new stack of forms that smelled like warm paper. The supervisor angled the screen so the live lobby view sat beside the text of the audit guidelines. The press badge waited just outside the rope, pen ready. I held my blue folder against my chest and felt the cool laminate of its cover begin to take my warmth. The director opened with the minutes. He read names and roles, then the string of numbers that belonged to the moment my card disappeared into a drawer. He spoke in a voice that knew it was being measured. He said the label, non-compliant, did not match the audit language.
He said the correct term was hold for verification and that the mapping in the system had been corrected. He said a member's card would not be retained without an immediate protocol number and a written reason using the words the guidelines use. He said a copy of the reason would be placed in the member's hand. He listed the corrections in order you could follow with your finger. Front desk. Issue the protocol number at the first indication of a hold. Security. Keep the member in sight of the main camera and provide seating that does not suggest guilt. Reception. Post steps for review where a person can read them while they wait. System. Show the member status on the first screen to reduce assumptions. Audit. Attach the policy excerpt to any incident that cites it. The guard shifted his stance and nodded once like somebody had just drawn him a better map. Then came the part that touches people. The director said the manager would complete retraining on terminology and escalation, documented in his file. The supervisor would conduct a review of the front desk script and lead a session on issuing protocol numbers and providing written reasons, with the receptionist attending as part of the shift's training block. A board follow-up would be logged to confirm that signage was posted and scripts were in use. He didn't speak anyone's name like a stone. He kept it on the work. And still the room understood that work belongs to hands. The receptionist stepped forward with the corrected receipt. Reason, hold for verification, as defined in section and date. Incident number at the top. Time pairs that match the lobby clock precisely. A line for my signature and a line for the supervisor's. The pen moved smoothly. The ink dried in a heartbeat. She took a breath and returned to her station, then lifted the small key from the hook by the monitor. You could hear the soft scrape of metal against metal as she opened the drawer. She carried my membership card back as if returning a photograph. The plastic felt warmer than it should have, edge softened by years, my name pressed under clear film. On the screen above her station, the red strip that had stained the counter earlier was gone. A neutral gray banner sat where the trouble had been, and under my profile, the word active waited quietly, like it had always meant to. I pressed my thumb to the card's surface and felt the raised numbers that anchor identity in plastic.
The journalist asked one question for the record: what a member should do if a label appears that they don't understand. The director answered without looking at his notes. Ask for the incident number and the written reason. Ask to see the policy language that defines the reason. Ask for the review steps and the timeline for a response. He held the printed notice at chest height so the camera could see procedure instead of faces. The rules, once said aloud and held up to light, looked simple enough to carry home. 2 employees from maintenance arrived with a small step stool and a rigid sign holder. They peeled backing from a fresh poster and pressed it onto the glass near the trophies, smoothing from center out so no bubbles lived under the words. The poster carried the steps the director had just spoken. The phrase incident number bold in the first line, a line for immediate receipt, a line about access to the policy. Tape made a quiet hush as it left the roll. The acrylic snapped into place with a clean little click that sounded like a room learning a new word. The veteran member who had witnessed the lot he seen signed the minutes as a witness. His penmanship leaned the way old men's signatures lean when they've written their names hundreds of times for histories no one else will ever read. He nodded to me on his way out and touched the brim of a hat he was not wearing. The guard adjusted the rope so that it no longer made a barrier between me and the counter. The rope fell into a gentle arc and stayed there. The supervisor handed me a printed acknowledgement. Your request for minutes and exhibits has been received. Attachments to include terminology section and footage reference. A board notice will be read into the record this afternoon summarizing corrections. The paper was heavier stock than the receipt, with a faint tooth you could feel if you dragged your nail lightly across it. I slid it into a clear sleeve and nested it under the statute's flagged pages. The folder grew weight without growing heavy. It felt like a book that had decided what story it would hold. The director read the formal notice, the one that would live in the binder by the front desk and on the portal's bulletin. He read it without hurry,
a line at a time, so each phrase could find its place in the lobby's air. He concluded with a sentence I recognized from the bylaw clause about members' right to an explanation without unreasonable delay. He placed the notice beside the new poster and signed the bottom in blue ink. The ink sat bright for a second, then settled. I thanked them for putting the words where people could reach them. I didn't make a speech. I didn't ask for anything beyond what the rules already owed. The receptionist gave a small nod I hadn't seen on her face before. Not apology, not friendship, something like relief. The manager stood near the edge of the scene with his hands folded, listening while the supervisor walked him through the script he would be teaching. The guard looked to the poster and back to me, then to the line that had reformed at the gate, as if the building had taken one breath and gone on.
The card warmed in my palm. I slid it into my wallet where it lives behind the old photo of my wife, the one where the light at our kitchen table put a faint halo around her hair because the window behind her wouldn't learn the word curtains. I closed the blue folder without snapping the elastic. The edges aligned themselves. I let my shoulders settle one notch lower. The air in the lobby lost its tin tang and found the smell of coffee again, carrying something soft from the cafe I couldn't name. I walked toward the exit, and the gate blinked green before I reached it, as if recognizing me from farther away than usual. The sound it made was small and even, a single tone that knew what it was for. Behind me, the director began explaining the new script to the next staffer, and the words incident number and written reason rose and fell like two oars rowing in time. The journalist lowered his pen, then raised it again to write one last sentence, the kind that tells readers where to go if it happens to them. I put my hand on the glass door and felt the day press back from the other side, warmer, unconditioned, the kind of air that belongs to no system. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. The poster's corners held flat to the glass. The card was light in my pocket. The building behind me didn't grow smaller. It simply stood there with its new words visible. I took one breath for the room I had left and one for whatever door I would meet next. When rules live in the open, dignity doesn't need an escort. Justice is just the truth written down and handed across the counter. If you stayed to the end, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me what you'd do, especially if it were your family. Until next time.